There is a moment in one of Rodney Dangerfield's most famous appearances where he sits down on a talk show couch, loosens his red tie, and looks at the audience with those big, wide, terrified eyes. The crowd bursts into laughter before he even says a single word. But here is the thing that most people never knew. He wasn't acting. That look of a man on the edge, a man who felt unwanted, invisible, and exhausted, that was real. And behind it was a story so painful, so deeply sad, that it makes every single one of his jokes land in a completely different way once you know the truth. This is the real story of Rodney Dangerfield and his wife Joan. A story about a man who spent his entire life searching for love he never got as a child. A story about a woman who finally gave it to him. And a story about an ending that will break your heart. Rodney Dangerfield was born Jacob Cohen on November 22, 1921, in the tiny village of Babylon, New York. From the very first days of his life, the world seemed to be sending him a message. You do not matter. His father, Philip Cohen, was a vaudeville entertainer who performed under the stage name Phil Roy. Philip was always traveling, always chasing the next show, always somewhere other than home. Rodney barely knew the man. He grew up watching other kids get picked up from school by their fathers, watching other families sit together at dinner tables, watching a normal life from a window he was never invited through. Then, one day, his father simply stopped coming home at all. He cut off all contact and disappeared from the family entirely. If the absence of his father left a hole, his mother filled that hole with ice. Rodney described his mother as emotionally cold, distant, and completely uninterested in showing him even the most basic signs of love. There were no birthday cards, no hugs, no words of encouragement, no one telling the little boy that he was good or smart or worthy of anything. In one memory that stayed with Rodney for the rest of his life, he had saved up his own money to buy a football uniform. He was proud of himself. He had worked for it. And then his mother stole that money right out of his hands. Not a stranger, his own mother. When you are a child and the one person who is supposed to protect you is the one hurting you, something breaks inside. A quiet voice in your head starts telling you that you are worthless. That voice stayed with Rodney Dangerfield for the next 80 years. The family eventually moved to Queens, New York. Rodney and his sister grew up in a tiny apartment full of silence and invisible walls. By age 15, with no father, a cold mother, and no real friends to speak of, Rodney discovered the one thing that could make the pain feel smaller: comedy. He started writing jokes the way other kids played sports. Not for fun at first, but for survival. If he could make people laugh, they would look at him. If they looked at him, maybe he existed. Maybe he mattered. Humor became his armor, his language, and eventually, his identity. After high school, the boy who was born Jacob Cohen legally changed his name to Jack Roy. He was 19 years old and desperately trying to leave his old life behind. He started working as a singing waiter, performing songs and jokes between serving plates of food at dinner clubs. It was unglamorous, difficult work, and he spent years struggling to find a voice that connected with audiences. He was not the Rodney Dangerfield everyone would come to love. He was just another young man in a very crowded room, shouting into the noise and hoping someone would hear him. By 1942, while still trying to make it in show business, Jack Roy picked up a habit that would follow him for the next 60 years. He began using cannabis. He was 21 years old and already carrying a weight of loneliness, anxiety, and sadness that most people cannot imagine. The cannabis, he felt, was the only thing that lowered the constant hum of nervousness he felt in his body. It was not recreational for him. It was medicine, or at least that is what he told himself. That habit would later cause him serious trouble. But in those early years, it was simply how he got through the days. By 1949, Jack Roy had been performing for years and had almost nothing to show for it. No real money, no real fame, no real future in sight. He made a decision that almost no one who knew him could understand. He walked away from show business completely. And the reason he did it was a woman named Joyce Indig. Joyce was a singer herself, someone who understood the world of entertainment from the inside. When Jack met her, something shifted in him. She was warm where his mother had been cold. She was present where his father had been absent. He fell for her immediately, and in 1949 they married. Together, they made a decision to chase what Rodney later called the picket fence dream. They left New York and moved to New Jersey, hoping that a quiet suburban life, a normal job, and a real home would give them both the peace that their difficult childhoods had stolen from them. For the next several years, Jack Roy was not a comedian at all. He drove trucks. He sold aluminum siding for houses. And here is something that surprises people when they learn it. He was extraordinarily good at it. He became one of the top salesmen in his entire field. The same discipline and focus he would later pour into perfecting jokes. He poured into his sales route. He worked long hours, took his job seriously, and proved that his determination was real. But no matter how many units of aluminum siding he sold, no matter how normal his life looked from the outside, the inside of that New Jersey house was far from peaceful. Rodney and Joyce fought constantly. The tension between them built and built until the house felt less like a home and more like a battlefield. They loved each other in some strange, complicated, destructive way, but they could not seem to live together without the walls shaking. They divorced in 1962 after 13 years of marriage. Then, in one of the most confusing decisions of his life, they remarried each other in 1963. It seemed they could not live together, but also could not quite let go. The second attempt lasted another 7 years before they finally divorced for good in 1970. During those years of chaos and fighting, Rodney was doing something important without fully realizing it. He was stockpiling pain. Every argument, every slammed door, every bitter night was being stored somewhere inside him. When he finally returned to comedy, all of that material was waiting for him. They had 2 children together, a son named Brian and a daughter named Melanie. After the final divorce, Rodney took over as the primary caregiver for both kids. He raised them largely on his own, while simultaneously trying to rebuild a career that had been on hold for over a decade. He was a single father in an era when that was not common, juggling the needs of 2 children with the demands of a brutal industry. And all of that, the loneliness, the failed marriage, the absent father, the cold mother, the years of struggling in silence, every single bit of it found its way into his comedy. When Rodney Dangerfield finally returned to performing in his 40s, he came back with something he had not had before. A character. Not just jokes, but a fully formed human being. A man who got no respect anywhere he went. A man whose wife did not love him, whose kids ignored him, whose dog walked him instead of the other way around. The character was a joke, yes, but the feelings behind it were completely real. Rodney did not feel respected. He never had. And audiences could feel that truth beneath every punchline, which is exactly why those punchlines hit so hard. His creative process was obsessive and precise. He always carried a small scrap of paper and a pen in his pocket. Every funny thought that entered his mind got written down immediately. He did not trust his memory with ideas because he knew ideas were fragile. Once a joke was on paper, he would spend weeks refining it. He would change a single word, move a pause, trim 5 syllables down to 3. He believed deeply that the shorter a joke was, the harder it would land. He was an engineer of language who built his entire career one perfectly measured sentence at a time. He would test new material at small clubs late at night, and if the laugh was not quite right, he would go home, adjust one word, and come back the next night to try again. He did this his entire career. He never stopped improving. By 1969, Rodney Dangerfield was finally becoming the household name he had always dreamed of being. He took a bold step and opened his own comedy club in New York City, simply called Dangerfield's. The club became legendary almost immediately. It was not just a place to watch comedy. It was a factory where new talent was discovered, tested, and launched into the world. Rodney used his platform to give chances to comedians who could not get a break anywhere else. He saw something in Jim Carrey Long before anyone else did. He put Sam Kinison on a stage when nobody else would touch him. He gave Tim Allen an early home. For a man who had spent most of his life feeling unseen, he had a remarkable ability to see others. And he loved doing it. Then, in 1983, something happened to Rodney Dangerfield that he genuinely was not prepared for. He walked into a flower shop in Santa Monica, called Childs of London, and he met Joan Child. She was 30 years younger than him, a flower importer with a calm, organized, steady energy that was completely unlike anyone Rodney had ever been close to. He went back to that shop again and again, which is how you know it was not about the flowers. They began a relationship, and for the first time in his life, Rodney felt something that resembled real peace. Joan was a Mormon. She did not drink. She did not smoke. She lived quietly and purposefully. And rather than being put off by Rodney's loud, anxious, complicated personality, she simply balanced it. She did not try to fix him or change him. She just stood beside him like a steady anchor in water that had always been rough. They married in 1993, 10 years after they first met. In 1995, Joan helped Rodney do something nobody in Hollywood had done yet. She helped him launch an official website, making Rodney Dangerfield the first major celebrity to have a personal home on the internet. Joan understood that the world was changing, and she made sure Rodney was not left behind. Their partnership was not just romantic. It was a true team. But even with Joan beside him, there was a darkness inside Rodney that never fully went away. He had been living with severe depression since he was 15 years old. He had hidden it from the world for over 50 years, performing happiness for packed auditoriums while quietly drowning on the inside. It was not until he wrote his autobiography in the 1990s that he finally admitted out loud how much he had been suffering. He went to therapy and said it helped him enormously. But he also refused to give up the cannabis, even when doctors asked him to. He had been using it since 1942, and he felt, in his bones, that it was the only thing keeping his anxiety from consuming him entirely. The habit caused problems in hospitals when he was sick, where staff and administrators clashed with him over smoking in medical facilities. But Rodney could not let it go. To him, it was not a vice. It was the wall between himself and total mental collapse. He also struggled in a deeply private way with a character he had created. Rodney Dangerfield was a mask. Behind that mask was Jack Roy, the real man, the kid from Queens who had been ignored and hurt and left behind. And the cruel irony was this: the more famous Rodney became, the harder it was for Jack to breathe. In every interview, at every party, on every talk show couch, the world wanted Rodney. They wanted the tie-pulling, eye-bulging, sweating, nervous wreck who got no respect. If Jack tried to have a genuine conversation, the audience got confused. They wanted the funny man. So Jack stayed hidden. And after decades of that, Rodney started to believe the jokes himself. He felt like a loser. He felt unworthy. He felt, even with millions of dollars and millions of fans, like the invisible little boy whose mother stole his football money. In August of 2004, Rodney underwent surgery to replace a heart valve. He was 82 years old, and doctors were cautiously optimistic. But his body, which had carried so much for so long, had other plans. Instead of recovering, he suffered a series of small strokes. Infections set in. His system grew weaker by the day. He was admitted to UCLA Medical Center, and there, in that quiet hospital room, Joan never left his side. She sat with him every single day. She held his hand. She talked to him even when he could not respond. She was the one constant, steady presence in a life that had been defined by absence. Then came the moment Joan would later describe to the world with trembling words. At some point during his time in the coma, Rodney seemed to return, just barely, just for a breath. He opened his eyes. He looked at Joan. He squeezed her hand. And he kissed her. Then he was gone again. It was, as Joan called it, the coma kiss. A tiny miracle at the end of a long and painful road. A man who had spent 80 years feeling unloved, making one final wordless statement to the one person who had truly loved him. On October 5, 2004, Rodney Dangerfield passed away peacefully. The comedy world went quiet in a way it rarely does. Tributes came from every corner of the entertainment industry. People who had never met him felt the loss personally, because that is what great comedians do. They make you feel like you know them. They let you into their pain and make it funny. and then you realize the pain was always real. Joan, in her grief, kept something that most people find strange when they first hear about it. She kept a small bottle of Rodney's sweat in her refrigerator. The sweat from his performances, from all those nights under the bright lights, when he poured every piece of himself into making strangers feel joy. To Joan, that bottle was not odd at all. It was the most honest thing she had. It was physical proof of how hard he had worked his entire life to earn the one thing he never fully believed he deserved: respect and love. The kind that, in the end, only Joan truly gave him.